Welcome to our channel, Crime Loom, the place where true crime stories come alive. In 1940s Los Angeles, the city of dreams shone bright with lights and promises. Among the dreamers was Elizabeth Short, a young woman who longed for fame and love. But instead of stardom, her life ended in tragedy. The world would remember her not as an actress, but as the Black Dahlia, the victim of Hollywood's greatest unsolved mystery. The city of Los Angeles was alive with bright lights and big dreams. It was 1946, just after the war. Men had returned home, women had new hopes, and Hollywood was booming with movies, music, and nightclubs. The city promised glamour, but behind the bright lights there was also loneliness, danger, and broken dreams. Elizabeth Short was a young woman who came to Los Angeles looking for something more. She was 22 years old with dark hair and pale skin. She had a sweet smile and a soft voice. People often said she looked like a movie star, even though she had not yet found her big break. She dreamed of acting, of being noticed, of having her name in lights. She grew up far from Hollywood. Elizabeth was born in Boston, Massachusetts in 1924. Her family life was not easy. Her father left when she was young, and her mother had to raise 5 daughters on her own. Times were hard, and money was always short. Elizabeth was restless. She wanted more than just small-town life and struggle. When she was a teenager, she became sick with lung problems. Doctors told her that she should spend time in warmer places where the air was easier to breathe. She spent part of her youth in Florida and later visited California. The sunshine and warm air helped her health, and she fell in love with the West Coast. Elizabeth was also fascinated by movies. Like many young women in the 1940s, she dreamed of being in films. She imagined herself walking down red carpets, wearing elegant dresses, and hearing people call her name. She wanted excitement, beauty, and love. By 1946, she had moved to Los Angeles. She did not have much money. She stayed with friends, boyfriends, and acquaintances. Sometimes she worked as a waitress. Other times, she relied on the kindness of men who were charmed by her beauty. She had many admirers, and she liked the attention. But underneath, she was lonely. She was searching for something she could never quite find. People remembered her as kind, polite, and dreamy. She often wore black clothes, which made her look even more striking. Her dark hair and light skin gave her a mysterious beauty. Some people said she was shy, while others thought she was playful. She was known to laugh easily and tell stories. Even though she looked glamorous, Elizabeth struggled. She moved from place to place, never settling for long. She borrowed money, asked for help, and made promises of plans that never seemed to happen. She told people she was waiting for movie opportunities, but the truth was that she had no clear path. She loved the nightlife. Hollywood had endless parties, dance halls, and nightclubs. Soldiers returning from war wanted company, and Elizabeth was often invited out. She enjoyed dancing and talking, and she liked being noticed. Men gave her gifts, dinners, and promises, but she was not just looking for money. She wanted love and adventure. Still, behind the fun, there was a shadow. The city could be dangerous for a young woman alone. There were men who lied, who wanted only to use her, and who could be cruel. Hollywood was full of stories about broken hearts and shattered dreams. As 1946 turned into 1947, Elizabeth's life grew more uncertain. She was seen in different parts of Los Angeles, staying with different people. Sometimes she wrote letters to her mother, telling her she was doing well even when she was not. She never wanted her mother to worry. In early January of 1947, Elizabeth was last seen alive in downtown Los Angeles. She had been staying with friends, meeting people, and moving around the city. Nobody knew that her life was about to end in a way so shocking that it would make headlines across the nation. On the morning of January 15, 1947, a woman was walking through Leimert Park, a quiet neighborhood south of Hollywood. She was pushing her baby in a stroller when she saw something strange in a vacant lot. At first, she thought it was a mannequin thrown away, but as she came closer, she realized with horror it was not a mannequin. It was a body. The police were called immediately. What they found would shock even the most hardened officers. The body of Elizabeth Short was lying in the grass. She was cut clean in half at the waist. Her skin was pale and drained of blood. Her face had been mutilated. The sight was so brutal and strange that it seemed unreal. News of the discovery spread quickly. Reporters rushed to the scene, and soon the story was on the front page of every newspaper in Los Angeles. The city was stunned. A young, beautiful woman had been murdered in such a terrible way. The press gave her a name that would never be forgotten: the Black Dahlia. The nickname came from her love of black clothing and from a popular movie at the time, The Blue Dahlia. The name stuck, and soon everyone was talking about her. The case became the most famous murder mystery in Los Angeles history. The police began their investigation, but they faced problems right away. Reporters interfered with evidence, and crowds gathered near the crime scene. Everyone wanted to know who could commit such a crime. The brutality of the murder suggested someone with medical knowledge or deep cruelty. Elizabeth's story was quickly pieced together. Reporters painted her as a mysterious, glamorous young woman who wanted fame but met a dark end. Some stories were true, but many were exaggerated or invented. The press made her into both a victim and a symbol. As days passed, the investigation grew larger. Hundreds of suspects were questioned. Strange letters and phone calls were sent to the police and newspapers, some claiming to know who killed her. The killer seemed to be playing games with the police, but the truth remained hidden. Behind the flashing lights of Hollywood, a young woman had lost her life in one of the most shocking ways imaginable. The story of the Black Dahlia was just beginning. The discovery of Elizabeth Short's body sent waves of fear and shock through Los Angeles. People whispered about it in cafes, on buses, and in theaters. Everyone wanted to know who could have done such a thing. The police had never seen a case like this before. Detectives quickly arrived at the crime scene. They studied the body carefully. The way it had been cut in half suggested someone who knew anatomy, maybe even a doctor. The cuts were clean and precise. Whoever did it had taken time. This was not a crime of sudden anger. It was planned. News photographers crowded around, taking pictures. The newspapers printed every detail they could find. Readers across the country were horrified, but also fascinated. The case became not just a murder, but a story. A mystery that people could not stop talking about. Elizabeth's past soon came under the spotlight. Reporters dug into her life. They wrote about her childhood, her family, her boyfriends, and her dream of being a movie star. Some newspapers painted her as a sweet, innocent girl. Others described her as a wild young woman who went out with too many men. The truth was somewhere in between, but the press made her into a symbol of Hollywood's dark side. Detectives began to search for suspects. They questioned dozens of men who had known Elizabeth. One of the first was a nightclub owner named Mark Hansen. Elizabeth had stayed at his house for a time, and some believed he had feelings for her. He was questioned, but no evidence tied him to the murder. Then there were the soldiers and airmen she had dated. Elizabeth had many admirers. Some gave her gifts, dinners, and promises. Others may have been jealous or angry when she refused them. The police wondered if one of these men had killed her in rage. But again, no proof was found. As the investigation continued, strange things began to happen. Just days after the murder, the Los Angeles Examiner newspaper received a phone call. The man on the line claimed to be Elizabeth's killer. He said he would send some of her belongings to prove it. A few days later, a package arrived. Inside were Elizabeth's birth certificate, some photographs, and a few of her personal items. The package had been carefully cleaned with gasoline to remove fingerprints. It was as if the killer was playing a game with the police, teasing them, daring them to catch him. Detectives worked around the clock. They followed leads, interviewed witnesses, and studied every detail. But the case only grew more confusing. For every clue, there were more questions. For every suspect, there was no solid evidence. Meanwhile, the newspapers kept the story alive. They gave Elizabeth the name the Black Dahlia, and soon it was on everyone's lips. Hollywood, once seen as glamorous and exciting, now looked dangerous and cruel. Parents warned their daughters to be careful. People locked their doors at night. The police department faced pressure like never before. The public wanted answers. Politicians demanded results. But weeks turned into months, and the case remained unsolved. Detectives grew frustrated. Some even believed that corruption inside the police force might be protecting the killer. Among the suspects, one name stood out: Dr. George Hoddle, a wealthy physician who lived in a large house in Hollywood. He was intelligent, strange, and rumored to have dark secrets. Years later, his own son would claim that Hoddle was the Black Dahlia killer. At the time, the police suspected him, but could never gather enough evidence to charge him. Elizabeth's murder also revealed something about Los Angeles itself. The city was a place of dreams, but also of shadows. For every person who found success in Hollywood, there were hundreds who were lost, forgotten, or broken. Elizabeth had wanted a life of glamour, but instead she became a victim of its darkness. The investigation dragged on. By the end of 1947, more than 150 suspects had been questioned. Confessions poured in, some from people seeking attention, others from people with troubled minds. None of them were true. Each confession turned out to be false. Elizabeth's family suffered in silence. Her mother, Phoebe Short, had believed that Elizabeth was doing well in California. When reporters first called her, they told her that Elizabeth had won a beauty contest. It was only later that she learned the terrible truth. The shock broke her heart. She struggled with grief for the rest of her life. As months passed, the newspapers slowly moved on to other stories. But the legend of the Black Dahlia remained. The case became part of the city's history, whispered about in nightclubs, written about in magazines, and remembered by everyone who lived through it. For the detectives who worked on it, the case was haunting. They had files full of evidence, interviews, and photographs, but no clear answers. Some retired still thinking about it, still hoping that one day the truth would come out. And so, the story of Elizabeth Short, the young woman who dreamed of fame, became something else entirely. She became a mystery, a symbol of Hollywood's dark side, and the central figure in one of the most famous unsolved murders in American history. But the story did not end there. Over the decades, new theories would rise, new suspects would be named, and new investigators would try to solve the puzzle. The Black Dahlia case refused to fade away. It lingered like a shadow over Los Angeles, reminding the city that dreams could easily turn into nightmares. Time moved on, but the shadow of Elizabeth Short's murder did not fade. The people of Los Angeles still whispered about the Black Dahlia. Her story was told in bars and coffee shops and in the lines outside movie theaters. Everyone had a theory. Everyone thought they knew someone who might have done it. The police kept working, but they could not find the killer. They had suspects, but no proof. Some detectives believed the case might never be solved. Still, they kept the files open, hoping that one day the right clue would appear. As the years passed, new detectives took over the case. Each one studied the photographs, the letters, and the long list of names. They followed old leads, searched through old notes, and interviewed people who had once known Elizabeth. But time was their enemy. Witnesses forgot details. Suspects moved away or died. Evidence grew cold. Still, the case refused to die. The newspapers would bring it back whenever there was a new clue or rumor. In the 1950s, the Black Dahlia was still talked about. Writers called it the most famous unsolved murder in Hollywood. Some believed the killer had been a stranger. Others thought it was someone Elizabeth knew, someone close to her who had grown angry or jealous. The way her body was cut apart made people think of doctors or surgeons. One detective said it could only have been done by someone with medical training. That led many to focus on doctors in Los Angeles at the time. Among them was Dr. George Hoddle. He lived in a strange, beautiful house in Hollywood that looked like a fortress. He was rich, smart, and powerful. Rumors said he threw wild parties there with artists, actors, and people from the city's darker side. Dr. Hoddle was questioned by the police. He was even secretly recorded by them years later. In those recordings, he made chilling remarks about women and death. Some detectives were sure he was the killer, but there was never enough evidence to prove it. He was never charged. Other names also came up. Some people thought Elizabeth had been killed by someone in the movie business. Others believed it was a man she had dated. The list of suspects grew long, but none could be proven guilty. Meanwhile, Elizabeth herself became a legend. Her face appeared in magazines, books, and later in films. People called her the Black Dahlia, as if that was her real name. Few remembered that she had been just a young woman with a mother, sisters, and dreams of a better life. The story of her death became larger than the story of her life. For her family, it was a wound that never healed. Her mother never stopped grieving. She had believed Elizabeth would have a bright future. Instead, she had to live with the memory of how her daughter's life had ended. For her sisters, it was the same. They grew older, but the mystery stayed with them, always present, always painful. The public, however, was fascinated. The case had everything that made a story capture people's attention: Hollywood, beauty, mystery, and horror. The newspapers had turned it into a drama, and people could not look away. In the decades that followed, books were written about the case. Some claimed to solve the mystery, naming suspects with great confidence. Others told the story in dramatic ways, turning Elizabeth into a symbol of broken dreams. Movies and television shows used her story, sometimes changing details, sometimes exaggerating them, but always keeping her name alive. Detectives who worked on the case later said it was one of the most frustrating of their careers. They believed the killer had been clever, careful, and perhaps even lucky. He had left behind no clear fingerprints, no witness who saw the crime, and no confession that could be trusted. It was as if he had vanished into the city, leaving only fear and mystery behind. By the 1960s and 1970s, Los Angeles had grown even larger. New crimes took the attention of the police and the public. Yet the Black Dahlia case never disappeared. It was always waiting, a dark story in the city's history. Journalists would return to it, digging through old files, hoping to find something missed. Then, in later years, new voices entered the story. One of them was Steve Hodel, the son of Dr. George Hodel. He became convinced that his father had been the killer. He studied the old evidence, the photographs, and even his father's words. He wrote books, telling the world his theory. Many believed him, but others remained unsure. Whether George Hodel was guilty or not, the story showed how the Black Dahlia case had become more than just a murder. It was a puzzle, a legend, something that people would keep talking about forever. But at the heart of it all was still Elizabeth. She was more than the headlines, more than the nickname. She was a daughter, a sister, and a young woman who had wanted to find happiness. Her story was tragic because her dreams had ended before they could even begin. And as the years passed, Los Angeles changed. The city grew taller, busier, and brighter. But in the shadows of its history, the Black Dahlia remained. People who walked through Leimert Park sometimes remembered the story. Those who lived in Hollywood sometimes thought of her when they passed old nightclubs and streets where she had once walked. The city had many stories, but none were as haunting as hers. The case was not just about a crime. It was about the darkness that could hide beneath the promise of fame and beauty. It was about the risks of chasing dreams in a city that could be cruel as well as kind. Elizabeth Short's name lived on. People spoke of her not just as a victim, but as a mystery. Her story became part of Los Angeles itself, a reminder of how fragile life can be, and how some questions are never answered, and so, the mystery of the Black Dahlia continued, unsolved, unforgotten, and forever written into the history of Hollywood. The years kept passing, but the shadow of the Black Dahlia never lifted from Los Angeles. New crimes came, new scandals filled the newspapers, but still people returned to the story of Elizabeth Short. It was as if the city could not let her go. Detectives retired. Files were passed on, but the case stayed open. The murder of Elizabeth Short was never marked as solved. It became what people called a cold case. Yet even cold, it burned in the memory of the city. Every few years, reporters would write about it again. They would remind people of the terrible crime, print Elizabeth's photograph, and tell the story of her last days. Sometimes new witnesses would step forward. Sometimes someone would confess. But each time the answers turned to smoke. Nothing solid ever held. For many people, the fascination was not only with the crime itself, but with what it seemed to mean. Elizabeth had wanted to be a star, but she became a symbol of the dark side of Hollywood. She was a young woman who had come with dreams, and instead she found tragedy. Her story showed that behind the bright lights of the movie business, there were shadows, secrets, and dangers. Writers began to use her story in books. Some wrote true crime accounts, searching for facts and clues. Others used her as a character in fiction, mixing truth with imagination. Films were made, inspired by her life and death. Each version added to the legend, and each one made it harder to separate fact from story. The police files told one story: a body cut in half, left in a vacant lot. The newspapers told another: a young woman who lived a wild life and met a cruel end. Her family told another: a daughter who was kind, hopeful, and innocent. Between these versions, the truth seemed lost. In the 1970s and 1980s, Los Angeles had new crimes that reminded people of the Black Dahlia. Other murders of women, other unsolved cases, carried the same sense of mystery and fear. Some wondered if the Dahlia's killer had never stopped, if he had kept killing in silence. But no one could prove it. The story of Elizabeth Short grew with each telling. Her picture, with her dark curls and sweet smile, appeared again and again. People who had never been alive in 1947 still knew her face. She became a symbol, a ghost haunting Los Angeles. Then came Steve Hodel, the son of Dr. George Hodel. By the 1990s, he was a retired detective. After his father died, Steve went through his father's things. What he found shocked him. Photographs, writings, and memories made him believe that his own father had been the killer. Steve Hodel studied the case deeply. He compared crime scene photos with old family pictures. He read police files, looked at old letters, and listened to old recordings of his father's voice. In those recordings, George Hodel had made chilling statements, speaking of crimes and death in ways that sounded almost like confessions. Steve wrote a book in the early 2000s, claiming that his father was the Black Dahlia killer. His theory captured public attention. Some people believed him, others doubted. But his work brought the case back into the spotlight again. The city, now more than 50 years older, remembered the Dahlia once more. New generations learned her name. The mystery seemed alive again, even though the answers were still missing. For Elizabeth's family, the pain had never faded. Her mother died many years earlier, still grieving her daughter. Her sisters also carried the memory through their lives. They spoke of her not as the Black Dahlia, but as Elizabeth, a girl who had loved life, music, and laughter. For historians, the case showed the power of media. The newspapers of 1947 had shaped the story. They had turned Elizabeth from a person into a character. They had created a nickname that would never die. They had taken a real tragedy and turned it into a legend. But legends can be cruel. The nickname, the sensational headlines, and the rumors had often hidden the truth of who Elizabeth was. She was not just a victim or a symbol. She had been a real woman, with hopes and fears, with a family who loved her, and with dreams that were never fulfilled. As the 21st century began, the Black Dahlia case remained unsolved. Police still held the old files, though time had erased many details. Evidence had been lost, witnesses had died, and the killer, whoever he was surely long gone. And yet the story lived on. It lived in books, in films, in late-night conversations. Tour guides in Los Angeles told it to visitors. Writers used it as a symbol of the city's darkness. The Dahlia became part of the identity of Hollywood itself. Beauty mixed with tragedy, dreams mixed with death. It was not only the brutality of the crime that made it unforgettable. It was the mystery. People are drawn to mysteries because they want answers. But some mysteries give no answers, and the Black Dahlia was one of them. For those who studied the case, the biggest question remained: why? Why had Elizabeth Short been killed in such a cruel way? What had happened in the hours before her death? Who had she trusted and who had betrayed her? These questions kept the story alive even decades later, and so the case of the Black Dahlia stood as one of the greatest unsolved crimes in American history. It showed the beauty and the darkness of Los Angeles, the city of dreams where not all dreams come true. Elizabeth's name remained known, not for the life she lived, but for the way she died. And though the city had changed, though the people had changed, her story stayed the same. A young woman full of hope, lost in a cruel mystery that the world would never forget. Time went on, and the Black Dahlia mystery never faded. Each new decade brought fresh voices who wanted to solve it. Writers, filmmakers, detectives, and even ordinary people became obsessed with Elizabeth Short's story. Some spent years trying to unlock the truth. The case became a mirror for Los Angeles itself. It showed how the city could be full of beauty and hope, but also shadows and secrets. Tour guides told the story on buses that drove through Hollywood. Books about the case filled shelves in libraries and stores. Even people far away in other countries learned the name Black Dahlia. But behind the mystery, behind the legend, there was still Elizabeth. She had been a real person, not just a photograph in a newspaper. She had once laughed with friends, written letters to her mother, and walked down streets dreaming of a future. She was more than the crime that ended her life. The police still held the files, though they knew the case would likely never be solved. Too much time had passed. Evidence had been lost. Witnesses were gone. Whoever the killer was, he was surely dead by now. Still, the case remained open, as if the city itself refused to close the door on the mystery. In later years, more theories appeared. Some believed the crime was linked to the world of art. They pointed to strange photographs and unusual paintings by surrealist artists who lived in Los Angeles in the 1940s. Others believed the crime was tied to organized crime, saying Elizabeth might have crossed paths with dangerous men. Some believed she was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, meeting someone who chose her as a victim for reasons no one would ever know. Steve Hodel, the son of Dr. George Hodel, kept writing about his father. He said again and again that George had been the killer. He even suggested that his father might have committed other murders as well. His books became popular and gave many readers the feeling that the case had finally been solved. But not everyone agreed. Some experts doubted his evidence. Others thought the truth would never be known, and maybe that was why the story lasted so long. If the case had been solved, if the killer had been named and punished, the story might have faded. But because it stayed a mystery, it grew larger and larger, taking on a life of its own. People were drawn to it not just because of the crime, but because of what it seemed to mean. It was not only about a young woman's death. It was about Hollywood, about the city of dreams, about the danger of chasing beauty and fame. It was about how fragile life can be, and how easily a dream can turn into a nightmare. Elizabeth's story became part of Hollywood's mythology. Alongside the glamour of movie stars and the glitter of the red carpet, her ghost seemed to linger. The name Black Dahlia stood as a reminder that not every dream ends with success. Some end in tragedy. For her family, though, it was never about legends. It was about loss. Her mother, who had once believed Elizabeth was winning beauty contests, had lived the rest of her life with grief. Her sisters carried the pain, too. They wanted people to remember Elizabeth not only for the way she died, but for the way she lived. They wanted her remembered as kind, hopeful, and alive. The story of the Black Dahlia also showed how powerful the press could be. The newspapers of 1947 had shaped the way people saw Elizabeth. They gave her a nickname, printed lurid details, and created a character out of her. Without the press, she might have been remembered only as Elizabeth Short. With them, she became the Black Dahlia, forever tied to mystery. Even today, writers and filmmakers continue to tell her story. Each new version adds a layer, some true, some imagined. Each keeps her name alive. But none can truly solve the case because the truth is buried too deep in the past. And so, the story continues. Tourists still ask about the Black Dahlia. Books still appear with new theories. Documentaries still replay the facts. The name still sends a chill through the air. Elizabeth Short wanted to be remembered. She dreamed of her name in lights. In a sad and tragic way, she got her wish. The world remembers her, not for her acting, not for a film she starred in, but for a mystery that has never been solved. Her story is one of beauty and tragedy, of hope and despair. It is a story that belongs to Los Angeles, but it also belongs to everyone who has ever chased a dream, everyone who has ever wondered about the thin line between light and shadow. The Black Dahlia will always be remembered, not only as a case in the police files, but as a legend of Hollywood. A young woman full of life who became part of the city's dark history, and perhaps that is why her story endures. Because it is not just about a crime. It is about the human heart, about dreams and dangers, about the way we are drawn to mysteries that have no answers. It is about how a single life, even when cut short, can leave a mark that lasts forever. In the end, Elizabeth Short never became the star she wanted to be. But she became something else, a name, a story, a symbol, remembered by generations. Her face still appears in books and films, her story still told and retold, her mystery still unsolved, and somewhere in the heart of Los Angeles, her shadow lingers, reminding the city of the dreamer who came for light and found darkness. Elizabeth Short came to Hollywood with dreams, but her life ended in tragedy. Her murder was never solved, and she became known as the Black Dahlia. Today, her name is remembered not for fame, but for mystery, sorrow, and a story that still haunts Los Angeles. Subscribe to Crime Loom, and join us as we unravel more heists, mysteries, and untold legends.